The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We can be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring spirit wings. It was the sixth day out on my annual solo backpacking trip in the Colorado La Garita Wilderness. I hadn't seen another human for 5 days. The morning of the second day, a very large raven started following my progress. He'd taken to flying over the tent every morning at dawn like clockwork, cawing loudly. I never needed an alarm with that one around. All day as I hiked, he would soar on the thermals overhead. When I stopped for lunch or at a stream to filter more drinking water, he'd perch in a nearby tree and watch with one black shiny eye, as if to make sure I was doing it right. Naturally, I started talking to him, and he would caw back at me. One afternoon, I was lying on a hillside after my lunch, watching him soar overhead. Ravens are amazing flyers, and he was entertaining me with his antics as he performed a perfect wing-over maneuver any aerobatic pilot would envy. I wish I could fly like that, I told him. I wonder what it would be like to be like you. Suddenly, I was high above my body, looking down at myself lying on the hillside. I could hear the wind in my primary feathers. I marveled how the slightest shift in a single wing feather would change the attitude of my flight. I could feel how effortlessly the air currents supported me. I looked into the distance and saw a small open park in the trees west of where I was lying on the ground below. Then things turned schizophrenic. I saw me through his eyes and him through mine, just before I suddenly found myself slammed back into my own body, dizzy and disoriented. That can't have just happened, I decided, when I finally got my bearings. I must have drifted off and had a dream. Yet I didn't remember falling asleep or waking. Digging around in my backpack, I pulled out a topo map of the area, spread it on the ground in front of me. When oriented to the directions with a compass, the map showed the area west of me was unbroken forest, without a park or clearing of any kind. I was about to blow it off as one of those inexplicable things that happens on Vision Quest, but I couldn't quite let it go. The raven cawed and winged off to the west, yakking at me. Fine, I'll check it out. It's going to bug me forever if I don't, I called after him. Packing up, I put on my backpack and compassed myself due west, as the raven flies. Less than 15 minutes later, I found myself standing in the center of a small but distinct clearing, the very one I'd seen while looking through the eyes of the raven. It was not indicated on the topo map, but it was there nonetheless. Ravens have long been a power animal in my shamanic practice. It's not unusual for me to commune with them in spirit form as well as in the feather. This was, however, my very first experience shape-shifting with one. As a result, I had to reframe the way I view the bird, both in physical form and in spirit. As we step down from total unity into the binary system necessary for biological life, different expressions or sets of frequencies take up residence in various species. As humans, we have a tendency to become energetically unbalanced, leading to physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual illness. Power animal healing is performed by a shamanic practitioner through connecting with a spirit or metaphor of the appropriate animal in the imagination, thus connecting with its frequency at the quantum level. This brings the counterbalancing frequency present for the client to align with. There's an amazing correlation between the behavior of animals in ordinary reality and the ones we encounter in spirit. I often find my power animal in feather or fur physically showing up at auspicious times. While spirit animals may well be metaphors, they do relate to their animal nation in ordinary reality. We are, after all, one with all that is, functioning as a giant organism in the larger scheme of things. When I longed to fly, my spirit friend in the feather granted me the privilege of sharing his experience for a brief time. I was forever changed, and I am forever grateful. Our guest this hour, Evan T. Pritchard, author of Bird Medicine, The Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism, has taught Native American Studies at Pace University, Vassar College, and Marist College. He's the author of several books, including Native New Yorkers and No Word for Time. Evan is a regular on radio shows such as NPR's Fresh Air and on the History Channel. He lives in the Hudson Valley of New York. After this short break, I'll introduce Evan, and together we'll take a flight of fancy into the magical world of shamanic bird medicine. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Prior innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Evan T. Pritchard, author of Bird Medicine, The Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism. Evan, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
Yeah. So you've been working with bird medicine and ancestral ways for a long time, and you had a wonderful story, or a tickler into a story, about your aunt. Would you mind telling us about your great aunt and how she influenced your path?
Yes, my great aunt Helen always told me when I was 13, I guess the first time I met her, and she gave me sweetgrass and sage, and she told me I was a Micmac, and there was nothing I could do about it, so I better learn the ways, and that I would be the one to, help carry on these traditions in the family. And she had an amazing rapport with birds. In fact, taught some of this lore to some neighboring tribes up in nations up in Maine, where she lived, at a very young age. And so I always respected that. And I'd like to say that, she kind of pointed at me and said, "You'll have the bird medicine," but I must have ducked because my sister got it. And she had the gift, but then it took a while for me to really understand what she was talking about. And so she really could talk to birds, and they would respond. And it always amazed me and impressed me that the native ways were very powerful. But it took me a long time to catch up with my sister. And I guess I never really have, but I have learned a lot, and the birds really helped me in writing this book, Bird Medicine.
How did they help you?
Well, once I really started to collect the stories, birds started showing up at just the right moments to make sure they got in the book, because, they would do some amazing things, and there was some good news in the news that affected me and my elder, William Commanda, who had the bird medicine, and a bluebird would show up at my window looking at me, and I thought I better call my elder to see what's going on with this bluebird. And of course he confirmed that among many native people, perhaps all, especially Navajo, that the bluebird does somewhat bring news of good tidings and happiness. And there's been a number of cases, like I was looking for an ending to the book to tie it in with the fact that this is a global phenomenon, and my father, who was Welsh, passed away at that, before that time, and I was outside, and a lark came totally out of region, a western meadow lark, and I was in eastern New York, and he just sat over my head for a half hour and gave me a concert, and I realized that was my father's bird, one of them, and that the Welsh had bird medicine too, and so that was the ending I was looking for. So this is just two examples, but there are many.
Most people see sighting birds as a random event or coincidence, and yet there seems to be much meaning that can be gleaned from paying attention to what they're showing up, when they're showing up, and how they're acting, what direction they come in. Would you go into the omenology of bird medicine a little bit for us?
Oh, yes. Well, the thing that I learned that I guess I wasn't clear with from my great-aunt Helen was that species has quite a lot to do with it, that each species of bird has its own particular power, its own particular strengths, and its medicine, and that when we're watching for bird omens, that it's very important to recognize the species as well as the behavior, because they each have their own ways. And you talk about the raven and the crows, all the blackbirds, we see them as one of the four power birds of the gatekeepers, and they're the storytellers. And of course, they are shamans as birds, and they're also ones that carry the spirits of ancestors, and sometimes will watch over us and protect us. And also, crows are warning birds. And in the physical world, according to some studies at Columbia University, and some subsequently, they find that all the animals understand the crow's warning signals. And many humans know how to watch for them, and they benefit from the crows. So that's just one. But like the eagle is at the north of this wheel, and the eagle is beyond, I think, questioning among Native people. There's generally the very positive spiritual power in the eagle, and the power of perception, of course, and strength. And in the east, we see the hawk as the eastern gatekeeper, the red tail, particular, who is a guardian and a guide, and who will sometimes make his shadow fall over us at a certain time, knowing that it'll catch our attention, and also will ride shotgun sometimes if we're going someplace in our cars that's important. And the crow is a lot of different, or the raven, a lot of different aspects, but great storytellers, and the power of communication and learning, because they're very smart. And in the West, we have the owls, according to our wheel, or medicine wheel of birds. And the owl is associated with death somewhat, and the journey to the West. That's why they're in the West. And it's a good thing. It's that they often communicate to us news of somebody who has passed on. And it's not necessarily sad or that there's anything wrong. It's a wonderful job. And when I was creating this book, Bird Medicine, I had been asked to find out, and it had to do with an environmental case in the courts. I was supposed to be an expert witness, and they said, go and find out if birds are sacred according to Native peoples. And so I called and interviewed and met with many elders from all over, and I said, are birds sacred? And they all said, yes. And I said, why? And they said, well, that's a hard question, but let me tell you a story. And so each of them told me an amazing story that blew my socks off and and changed my view of birds. And the thing is, a lot of them were about owls. So owls, just, looking at the number of stories about owls, they certainly are at the top of your list of birds to look for some kind of connection with the greater universe. And so they are. And so those are just four. And so in the book, I start with those four gatekeepers. But all the birds have shamanic power, and they all can give signs. And some are considered less reliable or more reliable than others, and that's a long story. But, they have every elder has his opinion or her opinion as to what bird they would like to work with, or birds in plural, because some, there's a difference between a power animal and, when a bird that's signing you in your clan bird or symbol, they're all different birds. So there's quite a lot to it. And it's all amazing, actually.
Evan, I've noticed that different traditions have different gatekeepers, and they differ on how they teach. Which one are you coming from?
Well, I have a Micmac background myself, and I found that in terms of certain aspects of the species-specific omens, I found it to be pretty much consistent. It's when you get into, like, for example, not perhaps every tribe or nation across the country recognizes that same wheel, but almost all the Eastern Algonquins do have exactly that same arrangement of that medicine wheel. But some of the other specific, names and connections might be different, of course, colors. But I found that the people I interviewed were generally fairly consistent about the kind of messages that a bird would give.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. It's pretty interesting how they have handed down this information, orally, and yet almost across the country, it's very, very similar in how they describe what the animal does. So can you define a power animal for us and how it differs from one you're just getting omens from?
Well, sometimes, first of all, a bird will just come to you when you're in an hour of need, and it may not be anything you understand, why that bird. It might be because of an ancestor you have who sent you that bird, you don't know. But they come, and you notice that bird keeps coming for you, and that's a helper. People would call it by different names, but that's your ally or your helper bird. But then when you look at yourself when you're praying, perhaps in your ceremony, and looking at what is weakest in you and what you need in terms to heal and to balance, since the birds can be observed objectively to have certain powers, and some species obviously have better sight. An eagle has better sight than an owl, but an owl has better hearing, and they're silent. The owls fly silently. So we know that from a scientific view, we can see some birds have some strengths, others some weaknesses. So you look at yourself and say, boy, I'd sure like to be able to see better, And if you can connect with that, I say on a quantum level, connect with the energy of the eagle, the idea is that will help your sight. And the same thing with, say, like owl, and maybe you need to be more quiet. And with a crow, they're very smart, so it would probably help your intellectual capabilities if you could connect with that energy. So those are power animals in the way we say it. But totem animals, the word literally means clan in our Algonquin languages. And so I think that has changed in its meaning, but still we want to honor the fact that no matter what nation you come from, and include even non-native, that a lot of nations and clans within those nations have birds or other animals that they're specifically tied to. And in my family, we have a connection with the moose, but also with the hawk and with the wolf. There's certain animals that our clan specifically adheres to. And so those will come and help us because of our ancestors. So we want to, make sure that people understand there's different meanings of totem animal now.
So it can vary from region to region and from clan to clan based on what animal is aligned with you or what bird is aligned with you. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that some birds will show up and align themselves to us, and there's birds that we want to align ourselves to in order to come back into balance. And then also, each clan might have chosen its own animal, its own bird, long before you were born. And that might apply even in Europe, but certainly with every Native American group I'm familiar with.
Okay, so your clan bird kind of brings this overlording frequency for you to align with to hold true to your ancestry, huh?
Yes, and specifically your ancestors, not just your ancestry, which you could think of as meaning like that whole general ethnicity, but specific ancestors, because, if your ancestors were practicing shamanism, where they are now, they're still doing it, I would say.
We're going to have to, Evan, we're going to have to take a break, but I'd like to take up with this talk about ancestors and birds and shamanism on the other side of this break. We'll return to our discussion. You are listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Do you want to hear more? Previous broadcasts of innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.com. shamanism.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. Visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Evan T. Pritchard, author of Bird Medicine, The Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism. And Evan, what's your website? Would you mind sharing that?
Absolutely. It's www.algonquinculture.org, and let me spell it. ALGONQUINCULTURE.org. And there's quite a lot of information on there about what I'm doing and also about who the Algonquin people are.
Perfect. So we were talking about birds as they relate to bringing ancestral messages or helping you hold alignment with your ancestors. Did you have something more to share on that?
Oh, I do, sure. Well, one of the things about the book is that, you learn through stories, and that's the traditional way. And some of the stories in the book are so, I'll say amazing that, really it changes your mind about what birds are. And I'll just give this one story. My first experience with bird medicine, I was very young. I must have been 13, and I was walking along the edge of the water on a beach in Maine, and it was a very specific spot that I always felt like had a good luck at this spot for no reason I could understand. But then I walked down the shore and I walked to that spot. I was walking past it, and a seagull came and dropped this giant fish right at my feet.
Whoa.
And he screamed at me, and then he flew away. And so I picked up the fish, and I'm looking at the bird. I'm thinking, well, thank you, but I'm not sure what to do with this. So the fish was quite alive and unharmed. And so I looked at the fish. I said, I'm not hungry, and I threw the fish back in the water. And, I wondered about that for my whole life. And then when I was working on this book, Bird Medicine, I went to a certain elder in my family, and we're Micmac, but, we don't always talk a lot about it, but we're Micmac. And so I asked if she had any bird stories, and I told her this incident. And she looked at me amazed. She says, she knew that spot. She says that my Micmac grandfather that I never knew used to go to that spot at sunrise, and as the sun, the red light of the sun, which is a sacred sign to us, the sun is close to the Creator in many ways, and when that red light, that sacred color, would flow across the water at dawn and hit the shoreline, that was a special moment for the local people, and that he would place tobacco on that spot at that moment and pray for our family and for future generations to come, which at that point basically was me. And so she said, I think that seagull was sent by your grandfather, and he liked seagulls. And so there's just one. And it turns out that it finally, even after the book was published, I found an entry in a historical record in Maine that spot was sacred to various local tribes and nations. That they would go on the summer solstice there to bathe themselves in the red water to heal, that they felt that it would be such a profound healing that they would not get sick. And so, in a way, that was the same spot he was putting tobacco in every morning, praying that I and the other grandchildren would not get sick. And I have been lucky in that way. I have never had a major illness like that in my life. And so that took 40 years to understand. But it shows you the power of our ancestors, and that's just one that kind of slipped through all the secrecy and all of the confidentiality in time to get in the book, and nobody seemed to mind. But the thing was that, these things don't always come to our attention. But I feel lucky that I found out, if at 40 years, it's worth the wait. And I found out that my grandfather was doing a whole lot more than I thought he was in terms of using the medicine in a good way. So that's just one story, but there's many. And I know Aunt Helen has helped with this book in many ways. And when she died, she visited her best friend who had moved, her neighbor had moved 5 miles away to the ocean, to the beach, where you don't see a lot of owls, but that owl flew 5 miles and found this blind woman in the upstairs window of her kitchen and started beating on her window and screaming at her, and she looked and she immediately knew. And she called her husband. She said, "Helen's died." "How do you know?" "Well, the owl told me." "Uh-oh, well, wait for a phone call." And then the phone rang. It all happened within minutes. And
Wow.
It was the phone call that said, your best friend just died. And
Wow.
that's how owls are. And, they're our friends. I mean, they say they can be misused and trick people, in the dark side, but all I know is my experiences, and the ones that I collected are mainly very positive and very dramatic for the owls.
Bird feathers are often used in shamanic healing rituals. And
Right.
would you share about how this works and why?
Yeah, and I also share that some of the people that were encouraging me to write the book were very concerned with the welfare of living birds as much as for the spirit animals that show up in our dreams, and they didn't want me to go too far into the feathers. And the reason why is because, we wouldn't want to think that anyone would kill a bird just for his feathers.
Right.
And so let's assume our listeners are above that. But yeah, it's the same thing. The species of the feather, of the bird that gives us the feather, will have the same power as the bird. And yet, sometimes the feather can do more. But generally, in any ceremony, and also in the arts, with Native Americans who are writing stories and nowadays doing movies, generally a feather has to do with your thoughts. A feather is, we say, from the direction of air, from the south of the wheel and my wheel, and then that's to do with communication. And so whenever you tie a feather to a shield or a drum or a flute, you're actually putting an antenna on it, in a sense, so that ideas and thoughts flow freely between different dimensions and this one. So that's the basis of it.
How I end up getting feathers, and I have enough Native American in me, I'm allowed to have them, but
Yeah.
how I end up getting feathers is they're gifted to me or I find them on the ground. And there's
Mhm.
laws against anyone without Native heritage possessing feathers of certain birds, the endangered ones. Would you
Yes.
mind speaking to this?
Yes, I wrote about that as I was writing the book. A new law was passed clarifying that very issue to help Native Americans to know whether they were, so legally safe to collect those feathers. So what's happened, though, is that, the raptors mainly are protected. Their feathers are protected because people really do kill raptors to get feathers, which is ridiculous. But they found is when they started enacting that law that coincided with a sudden increase in the population of eagles and hawks, and it showed that people really were killing them for feathers and in secret. So I'd say the law was somewhat effective, and yet, I also am an advocate for mixed blood people practicing, their culture as it's come to them, and I think the clarification helped them too, in a sense of knowing where they stood. But it certainly has been effective, and so that's my main take on it, is from a pragmatic point of view. And eagles are really very precious birds, and so whatever protects them as a species is well worth the effort, and they certainly help me. And the feather of the eagle actually has a certain power that's pretty unique, and most Native people will tell you that. And whether you have to, maybe you have to go and talk to someone who's able to collect those feathers or have them, but the eagle feather has a tremendous feel to it in ceremony, and it's like a very big antenna that speaks directly to the Creator. And when you speak holding the feather, you know that your words are being heard by the Creator and by the whole universe, in a sense, and that certain messages will come to you while you're holding that, just like a radio antenna. And I have certainly experienced that almost every time, holding an eagle feather.
We're going to have to take another break. We're just going through time so fast. When we get back from this break, I'd like to talk about shape-shifting and all that fun kind of stuff. So we will be back on the flip side. You're listening to The Science of Magic, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. You can always listen to previous broadcasts on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Don't fly away. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. Our website is www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Evan T. Pritchard, author of Bird Medicine, The Sacred Power of Bird Shamanism. When we came into the break, you were starting to tell some stories, and I understand that stories are the way that this information has been passed down for generations. What are the stories about birds do you have to share with us?
Well, I want to emphasize that this happens today in a modern times, that these stories that I collected from these elders for the book are often recent stories and involve specific people. And so one of the things I didn't understand at first was that these souls, or these entities that some of which are our ancestors, our friends who have passed on, seem to be literally able to speak through birds and in fact see through the birds. And I know in your story earlier you had a reversal where you were seeing through the bird and them through you, and that seems to be what happens. And I consulted with Stanley Krippner, who's a professor in shamanism, and he said absolutely, and he gave me contacts of people to talk to specifically, but it just seemed to be the answer is that all these strange phenomena can be explained from the idea that consciousness can be transferred into a bird so that bird can act in this world. And I'll just tell you a funny story. One story was before I was writing this book, as a matter of fact, it was a while ago, is that I was involved with Joseph Campbell and Gene Erdman, who write a lot about aminal powers and magic, by the way, from a scientific point of view. And he had passed away, and we're working on starting the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And I was talking to Gene Erdman about this, his wife, and I was struggling as to how much money to offer to become a member, because some people, like George Lucas, were offering $1 million, and I had about $60 in my wallet. So I called her in Hawaii and from my home, and I said, I am really struggling with this. I want to become a member. I don't know how much to give. She said, well, what would your Micmac ancestors do if they had such a problem? I said, well, of course, they'd go out, they'd put tobacco down at the bottom base of a tree, and they'd wait for a sign, and then they'd go by the sign. She said, why didn't you do that? Why aren't you doing that now? Why don't you go out and do it now? Go put your tobacco out and ask for a sign. So I said, okay, I'm hanging up the phone. I'll get right back to you. So I took tobacco. I went outside to the tree right outside the door and put the tobacco at the base of the tree. And right away, this blue jay came up. And, a blue jay is a very kind of persistent bird, a little hard-headed, is very magical, and, a little bit like Joseph Campbell, and got on a branch that was right at my eye level, and he stared into my eyes, and I stared back into his eyes, and he said, 60. And I looked at this bird, I said, are you telling me to give $60 to the Joseph Campbell Foundation? And he nodded his head, and he said, 60. And I said, well, $60, and are you serious? And the bird said one more time, he said, 60. And then he nodded, and then he jumped up off the branch and flew away. So, of course, I went in to the kitchen, went back on the phone, and called Jean in Hawaii, and I said, what happened? She says, oh, that's your sign. That's how much you should give, and that's just the kind of thing that Joe, she called Joe Campbell, Joe, always said is the way it should be, and that he would always follow those signs. So you shall be a member of the Joseph Campbell Foundation if you donate $60. So I don't know how that blue jay knew I had $60, but, it was one of those moments I was a little on cash. But that's what happened. And so there you can see there's probably a connection with Joseph Campbell's spirit in that bird. But there's another case where one of my main informants was a Cherokee, Delaware named Blessing Bird, who worked out of the Maryland area and had given me wonderful stories. And I was trying to get her permission forms back, and sometimes people don't always send their forms back in time, I hate to say. But I started to get worried, so I called and I wrote, and finally I got a message from her elder and best friend and said that she'd died, that she'd passed away. And so I was very, knocked over by that news, because she didn't seem sick to me, and yet she was. And I knew her pretty well. She had kept that hidden. So I had to go to work. I was teaching at Pace and giving, classes on Native American shamanism. And so I had to jump in the car and drive through traffic to get to school. And this red-tailed hawk showed up and started flying next to me, not on my passenger side, but right next to me on the driver's side, about inches from my window, and stayed there and rode with me. And then, to make a long story short, at the end of that section of that highway, the bird kind of really backed up and looked me in the eye, and it was very shocking, and I kind of had an out-of-body experience. And then the bird, the hawk, was a huge-looking female red-tail, got in front of my window and then rolled her head around and then flipped her feathers, the wingtip, in a kind of a salute. And the head went around almost like saying, see you around. It was very human. And then the bird flew off into the woods. And I knew I had to put the story in the book. And so that's how it turned out. That's just another way that you have specific, sometimes people that are linking to certain birds at very dramatic moments such as that. And so she, of course, did end up having that story in the book as well. And so, it isn't always so mysterious. We know sometimes the specific souls or different entities reaching us. And I then talked to several shamanic practitioners and experts, including some people connected to Rolling Thunder and some Australian Aboriginals who said the same thing, that they would talk about traveling in, say, eagles or hawks to go see something, to go experience something before they were passed on, just while they were in ceremony. So your experience is really, I think, in harmony with all of that you're talking about, switching places and, in a sense, shape-shifting like that. I mean, you could say it is, or it isn't, but it's, we are closer to birds than we know, and they are our cousins. They developed in the same time period of evolution as humans did, with that extra packet of communications that we have not all yet to understand, even native people, but there's a lot of things we can learn from birds because they know how to communicate, at least among each other. And all we have to do is just start to unlocking those keys, not just to their songs, the things they say, but to their species and how they move and how they go from right to left, east to west, make their shadows fall over us. All these are very loving and caring things that birds do when they're trying to teach us something. They're our brothers.
Do you have anything you'd like to share with our listeners on how they can bring bird medicine into their daily lives?
Yes, that's a good question. I would say that, they could read the book and understand the species. Believe it or not, it really helps to understand that code and what each species is doing, but certainly feeding them if it's appropriate and just paying attention to them. They like drumming songs, by the way. Most birds respond very positively to drumming, especially eagles, and will come to you if you're drumming. They like bird songs. One thing is the recordings of birds attract them very strongly. So if you're really not having any luck, you can go outside and bring recordings of birds and play them loudly, and they will be very interested. And also on flute, I play the cedar flute and do bird calls on the cedar flute. But other people might find similar ways. But also ceremony, to use tobacco or whatever your tribal group uses for offerings. Make offerings of thanks to the birds, and sometimes even apologies, because birds are going through a whole lot these days. They're very affected by technology in the environment, including cell phone towers and water pollution and noise and a number of things. So we need to also offer them thanks.
Before we're out of time, would you mind telling our listeners where they can find your book and tell us your contact information again?
Well, the book Bird Medicine is in most bookstores, but they can order it through my website, www.algonquinculture.org, and they can also get it through Intertraditions Bear & Company and through their websites. And they can write to me or email me at evan.pritchard7@gmail.com, and I generally am able to respond to most of these emails that I get, which are...
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to past thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love as your soul takes flight.